Welcome to our webinar on mastering compliance and hiring new employees. Today, AllianceHCM and myHRcounsel are collaborating to provide you with guidance for seamless and legally sound employee hiring. Our subject matter expert, Andrew Nielsen, will share his 18 years of legal experience in dealing with hiring issues facing businesses today. Before we begin, please note that all lines are muted and we are recording today's presentation, and it will be available for on-demand viewing. Please use the Q&A section to submit questions, and we will read those questions out loud, and Andrew will kindly provide answers. One thing I'd like to mention is attending today's webinar qualifies for 1 hour of continuing education credits for both HRCI and SHRM, and we will send out instructions upon the conclusion of today's presentation on how to redeem those credits. Now, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Andrew for today's presentation. Thank you all for joining us.
Good morning, folks, or good afternoon if you're on the Eastern Coast, Eastern time zone. That's me, Andrew Nielsen. I'm the general counsel here at myHRcounsel. I've been practicing law longer than I'd like to admit. When I heard that 18-year number, it made me feel old. I don't feel old, but I guess I've been doing this a long time, which means I know a lot, or I think I know a lot. I've seen a lot, that's for sure. Still, even after 18 years of doing this, something crazy comes up about once a week. I was like, wow, that's weird. I never heard of that before. So even as long as I've been doing this, it goes to show that there's always some new wrinkle that pops up, either some new fact pattern or some new law. So thank you all for joining us today as we are going to talk about hiring. That's enough of my face. Ty is going to interrupt me as needed as questions pop up. I have the Q&A thing, but it's way over here on my right-hand side, and so I'm not going to be looking at it that much. So if I miss it, Ty is going to be nice and poke me and say, Andrew, we have a question. So feel free to drop in those questions as they come up, and I'll do my best to address them live in time. If not, we'll get to them at the end. Have no fear. Just a little bit of an agenda today, so we know where we're going. Roadmap, if you will. So we're going to talk about whether or not you even need to hire. We're going to talk about job parameters, job descriptions. We're going to talk about recruiting for the position. We're going to talk about interviewing and job offers. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the hot button issue of the day or week or year, which is artificial intelligence and hiring. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first thing you want to do when you're hiring is to identify the job opening. Now, to some of you, that might seem fairly obvious. It's like Bob in receiving quit, and we need to replace his position. Sometimes it's not necessarily all that straightforward. So I would just like you to indulge me, if you will, to, before you decide to hire, step one, just determine whether or not you need to add additional headcount or whether or not you need to hire an employee. So the first step is to assess if the work can or should be distributed into existing employee functions without creating a new position. So if the company reallocates work to a new position, some things you're going to want to consider are updating job descriptions so they accurately reflect the new position, or actually the modified position's changes in the affected employee's job scope. We're going to talk about whether or not that employee's job scope changes their classification from exempt to non-exempt or vice versa, which would subject you to overtime or minimum wage laws potentially, or exempt you from them. Third, we're going to talk about adjusting employee pay for added job responsibilities if you're going to add those duties to another position. Another thing to consider is perhaps this job could be automated. We are in the world of tomorrow where jobs are automated. We're going to talk about AI in the future. And what we're going to talk about is if you can potentially take that job that the person was doing and use some automation to make that job either not a full-time job or to slide that under the auspices of another position. Once we decide whether or not we can fill that position just by shifting the duties to another employee, I'm going to presume we can't. A lot of times we can't. So then we're going to determine, can we fill this position internally? Are we going to promote internally to fill a position? Does the company have candidates? Does it have a deep bench to be able to do that? So if you're going to promote internally to fill a position, the company should carefully evaluate, internal candidates, postings, so that any decision that they make to promote an employee is based upon objective criteria and accurate performance reviews based upon that employee's past performance. If you're not going to promote internally, or not open it up only to internal applicants, you should ensure that the failure to promote employee is not an act of disparate treatment that is because of the employee's membership in a protected class, that's age, race, gender, sexual identity, etc. Not because they complained of sexual harassment in the past, or not because of a concerted protected activity under the National Labor Relations Act, which we're not going to get too deep in the weeds on that. I see Katrina has submitted a quick question here about updating. Do I mean updating job descriptions to existing employees? To answer to that is yes. If we're talking about reassigning job duties to an existing employee. So if Barb in accounting, his job is going to get absorbed by 3 bodies in accounting, we're going to update those other 3 job descriptions to make sure that they accurately reflect the fact that they're absorbing Barb's job duties. Patrick, I see your question. I'm going to answer that a little bit down the road. That's going to be answered a little bit in a couple slides ahead. So presuming that we haven't decided to hire from inside, and presuming that we have decided that we do need to replace that head, we're going to talk about what kind of staffing method we're going to use to hire. And there's a couple different options. We've decided that we're going to hire this new employee, but are we going to use temporary staffing? Are we going to find them ourselves? Are we going to hire a contractor? Or unlikely case that you're big enough, are you going to use a secondment? So once we've got to the part where we're going to hire a new employee, we need to consider issues such as whether or not the company has the budget and volume of work sufficient to add the employee. Is the employee going to be full-time? Is the employee going to be part-time? Was this a part-time position that the person quit because they were overworked and you need to add more hours to that head? Or is this a job that, is going the way of the dinosaur in terms of, let's say their job was to proofread newspaper ads. Well, I haven't read a newspaper ad in a long time, and I don't know a ton of people that do. So maybe that job used to be part-time and it only needs to go down to part-time at this point. The company should consider the cost of that additional headcount. We're talking salary, but we're talking more than salary. We're talking benefits, healthcare, insurance, all that fun stuff, retirement. But we're also talking about, do we have the space for an additional headcount if we're adding somebody? Do we have the appropriate licenses for technology? Do we need more Office 365 seats in order for them to use our software? Do we need something in order to get them up and running and ensure that they're successful? Some companies are in the position where they can sponsor foreign workers. I don't have a ton of clients that do that. It's a very niche thing. But if you're in that space where you can consider that, I would engage competent immigration counsel to help you with all that process with getting through the federal red tape. If we're not going to do it in-house, maybe there's other staffing options that will work. Number one would be a temporary staffing agreement. I've got a bunch of clients that are temporary staffing agencies, and these temporary staffing agencies provide workforce, flexible workforce for you to fill your positions with. A lot of times these are generally unskilled positions, but I've seen, and I have friends who are like fractional CFOs on a temporary staffing basis. So that might be something that works for you too, either before you hire somebody or in lieu of hiring somebody. Just be aware that there are some joint employment liability risks potential with a temporary staffing agency agreement. So make sure that the contractors are reviewed and that you're comfortable with what is going to be provided. Maybe you want to hire an independent contractor. Maybe this position is not key to your organization. Maybe you're replacing a custodian at your building, and instead of hiring a new custodian, you're going to hire an independent contractor, be it an individual or an agency, to come in and do that work for you. Before you do that, you want to make sure that the position really is that of an independent contractor. And in order to do that, we need to look at state law. We need to look at federal law to make sure that we're not running afoul and misclassifying the employee such that we no longer are compliant with the Fair Labor Standards Act and other state and local laws. And finally, secondments, it's a fun word, doesn't come up very often. It's where you have another company that's related to you that you can hire. Basically, you're borrowing an employee from them and bringing them onto your payroll for a little bit. I've seen this maybe twice in 18 years. Usually happens with much larger organizations. All right, so once we've decided to hire that new employee because we didn't like the independent contractor option and we didn't like the temporary staffing agency option, we need to know what job we are hiring for. So once the decision to hire a new employee has been made and we've determined the method for doing so, we need to create the job parameters for any new position or existing position and review them to make sure that they're up to snuff. So the first step is going to, prepare the job description. So the job description should include the essential functions that an individual must be able to do to perform with or without accommodations to be qualified for the job. And this is going to help you down the road too if there's ever a disability accommodation request. Having this job description is going to trump a lot of claims made by employees because courts defer to what employers say the job is. So if you have a written job description that predates any sort of disability accommodation request, you're going to go a long way into winning or making your case a lot easier. Also, with preparing the job description, we're going to take into account the strategic goals of the company and the hiring department, including any upcoming changes that might impact the role. So, for instance, if you were hiring somebody in benefits before Obamacare came into place and you knew that the Affordable Care Act had been enacted, you might want somebody who's able to handle those types of issues that might come up with the Affordable Care Act. And finally, you want to cover any gaps or core skills that are missing from the hiring department. Example here would be if I was hiring an attorney at a law firm and we had some work that required some employment law experience, but nobody on the team had experience with employment law, I'm going to write a job description because I'm going to hire for someone that can do some employment laws. I'm going to make sure that they have employment law chops in the job description for this job. Before you finalize that job description, you want to review it for compliance with law to make sure that there's no violation of anti-discrimination laws, and that you don't give any rise to potential discrimination claims. For example, a job description should avoid stating a preference based upon a protected class, such as religion or gender or English only. I've seen a bunch of those. Those preferences are only lawful in extremely limited circumstances where the company can demonstrate the characteristics are a BFOQ, which is a bona fide occupational qualification subject to a religious exemption. So, for example, if you were a Catholic church, you could say, looking for a priest must be Catholic. I think that's going to fit. But if you're hiring for a CSR and a magazine subscription company and saying you must be evangelical Lutheran, I don't think that's going to fly. Next step, determine whether or not the employee is going to be exempt or non-exempt. Now, a lot of times this is going to be easy if it's the same position you're hiring for. It's going to probably be the same, but you just want to make sure you analyze it before you hire for the position, just to make sure that you have it right, and to avoid any potential problems down the road with misclassification. In order to do this, you need to look at both federal and state laws for that position, and you need to make sure that some states are tricky. I know Wisconsin's one of them, where the duties test is slightly different for some of the white collar jobs than they are at the federal level. So you need to make sure they meet both the federal and the state exemption in order to be exempt under the law. Got a question here, couple of them. What do you, so the question relates to the BFOQ that I just said. If you need someone who's bilingual and fluent in a specific language, yep, that's going to be a bona fide occupational qualification. So if their job is to translate from Polish to English, and you say they need to speak Polish fluently, I think that's going to be legitimate. Oh, and Kunle had a question about what do you call the worker borrowing or hiring from another company, and that's called a secondment. And I do believe we're going to shoot out the deck for this afterwards, so you'll all have copies of my beautiful slides when we're done. All right. Once we've determined the exempt, non-exempt status, we're going to set the salary range and benefits for the position. We want to know what we can afford. We want to know, market data, including reliable salary surveys for what other companies of similar revenue, similar industry, similar size, and other relevant factors are paying for these positions. So if you can get a hold of a market data salary survey, that'd be great. There are companies that provide those, obviously for a fee. We want to consider your internal company pay grades. Hopefully you have pay grades set up so you know what kind of salary band, we're looking for. Number 3, we want to see if there's been any internal pay equity audits done and where we were in terms of compliance with that. So we did an internal pay equity audit and we found out that we were out of bounds on a couple things. We want to make sure when we're setting the salary band for this position that we're going to do whatever we can to correct that issue. And finally, and I think this one goes without saying, is we're going to look at your budget. I mean, if you can't afford to pay $100,000, you're not going to advertise to pay $100,000.
Andrew, we have one more question that came in that's for that particular slide selection. Monica submitted the question, if my clients are 90% Spanish speaking, can I say must be bilingual?
Well, that's a good question. I would like to know more about the job and the actual duties of the position. Do they actually, is there somebody else there that can speak Spanish while they're there? Is it a safety issue? So if we're working in a safety sensitive position and we need to yell, look out, hot metal coming at your face. then we're talking about that's an issue, that the safety sensitive issue might come up. But if there's someone else who can speak Spanish there at the time, then I think it's going to be less of a bona fide occupational qualification.
Okay, all right, and we have some just clarification on the questioner's side. So the position's medical assistant or nurse practitioner. I'll leave that with you.
Yeah, again, we're going to need to, you would need to analyze the essential functions of the job and other intricacies of the position to determine whether or not that's going to fall as a BFOQ if the EEOC ever comes in and tries to fight with you about it. Okay, good questions though. Now that we have our job description done, we're going to recruit for the position. And so a carefully structured recruitment process is going to map out your strategy for attracting and hiring the most qualified candidates and help you ensure that the company reaches a diverse applicant pool. So the first step is to advertise the position. It used to be a debate of where you would advertise the position in terms of, do I do it online? Do I do it in a newspaper? Do I do it, on billboards? As I alluded to earlier, I don't have an anti-newspaper bias, but I don't think people read the newspaper anymore, at least not on paper. So what you should do is think about where do you advertise to find these jobs? Do you do it on Indeed? Do you do it on Monster? Do you do it on Hot Jobs? Where do you do it? Do you do it on LinkedIn? Where are you going to find the candidates that you want to attract to the position? So consider different methods just to ensure that you get that wide pool of potential candidates. In your job posting itself, you should always include a statement that you are an equal opportunity employer, and you should always outline the essential functions of the position based upon that job description that we've helpfully just written. So we know what the job is, we know what we're looking for, so we can put that in the job posting and get the people that we want. What do we exclude from job postings? We're going to exclude things that are illegal, obviously. We're not going to indicate a preference or limitation based upon sex or other things, unless, again, it's a BFOQ. And we're not going to try to deter older individuals from applying. You'll see this is a little foreshadowing. This comes up later in the AI section, but we don't want to add seeking recent college graduates or candidates with 3 to 5 years experience, as opposed to add seeking individuals who meet a minimum threshold, such as at least 3 years of experience. If you're a contractor, either federal or state contractor or subcontractor, make sure that you're meeting affirmative action obligations as it relates to women, minorities, and qualified individuals with disabilities and veterans. And maybe instead of posting the job yourself and handling it internally, maybe you consider engaging a recruiter. Maybe human resources has too much work on their plate and the time constraints are too tight. That's going to limit HR's ability to manage this job search. Maybe HR is in a different physical location than where the position is based, and they need a recruiter with experience and contacts in that specific and targeted geographic area. Sometimes recruiters have more information on that job market. Sometimes they keep candidates in their back pocket. And they have a better idea about different candidates' availability and salary requirements that you're going to want to hit.
All right, Andrew, a question that came in. It's pretty, I'm just going to read it out here for you. When recruiting for a minimum wage position that receives tips, is it okay to advertise the pay range, including average expected tips?
Probably. I would just make sure that you word it such that there's no quasi contract created, so that if somebody comes in and I forget the tipping rules in Wisconsin, but it's like $2 or $3 per hour plus tips, and as long as you make minimum wage, it's cool. So if you say expected, if you say the compensation is hourly plus tips, and you can say the average bartender gets X dollars per hour based upon our experience, that'd be cool. I just want to make sure that you're not promising anything so that they don't go back later and say you promised me X in the job description. And you're also going to cover yourself with that with your offer letter, which we'll get to, is going to state that you get paid X dollars per hour plus tips. And this is at will employment, and you're not relying on any previous statements. We talked about recruiters. If you are going to use a recruiter, just one last thing, make sure you review the contract to make sure you know what you're getting. If you have a legal department, even better. A lot of times they have guarantees if the employee does not pan out. All right, pre-screening applicants and preparing for interviews. So once we've got our job posting out there, we've been inundated with a mountain of resumes and applications. And so we need to select qualified applicants for the interview by collecting the resumes and gathering the standardized information from the applicants using application forms that comply with applicable state, federal, local laws. And by that, I mean, don't ask for criminal arrest or conviction history. You probably don't need social security numbers or dates of birth unless it's an age restricted position, such as I think some bartenders, I think you have to be 18 to bartend or dispense liquor to get a liquor license in most states. We don't necessarily need to know if they're male or female or non-binary. We don't need to know race generally, religion, any of the protected classes. We're not really looking for any of that in our resumes or in our application process, again, unless it's a bona fide occupational qualification. We also want to consider whether the applicants, based upon that mountain of information that we've gotten, either on their resumes or their applications, meet the minimum essential job requirements of the position. And so this, again, refers back to our job description that we wrote. We wrote this job description that talks about the essential functions of the job. And now we can compare our resumes to that to make sure that we see what lines up and what doesn't. And we want to make sure, essentially, when we're looking at these, the lens that we're using is, can this person perform the essential job requirements with a reasonable accommodation if needed? And if they can't do it, then you would not pass them on to the next round in your sifting and winnowing. You can think about reviewing social media activity during the screening process, but there are risks in doing so. That is a webinar in and of itself. So we're not going to go into that, but just be aware that it's a thing. Once we've sifted and winnowed all those mountains of employee applicants that we've gotten, we're going to conduct a phone screening of a narrowed pool of those applicants to obtain information about their availability, their salary requirements, relocation needs, whether or not they have the essential job skills or other preliminary information you might want. Number two, we're going to gauge their communication skills and professionalism. If they, are going to be a customer service representative and they just don't sound good on the phone, or, something tips you off that it's not going to work, you can screen them out at that point rather than having to bring them in for an interview. Number three, it also eliminates time-consuming meetings and interviews with applicants who just don't meet what you're looking for. So once we've done that, we're going to extend in-person interviews only to the short list of applications who best meet, again, the essential job requirements that we've done in our job description. So that's why it's important that we do that up front, so we can use that to measure against all the applicants that we get in. Once we've got all these applicants that we want to do interviews for, we're going to establish an interview format. We're going to decide who's going to do the interviews. Is it going to be a single person? Is it going to be a panel? How many rounds are there going to be? Et cetera, et cetera. We're going to outline what we're going to ask and how long the interview should roughly take. And we're going to list out the questions we're going to ask of all applicants. And if we're asking specific questions, the weight assigned to each question based upon their importance to the essential job duties. So we figure out what we're looking for so we can compare that again to the essential job functions based upon our job description so that we get the person that best fits that job. And finally, we're going to, if there's multiple people, we're going to figure out who's going to ask what question in which interview. We're also going to talk about a search committee. A search committee could also be an interview committee or a hiring committee, whatever you want to call it. But we want to make sure that there are individuals who the applicants get interviewed by to ensure that no one person's biases, either conscious or subconscious, affect the hiring process. Now, some of you in smaller organizations, you just don't have it. I know I have done it before hiring attorneys. I've done it all by myself, and I haven't had a second party involved. And sometimes that's okay. But if you can, consider having multiple viewpoints, because there are things that some of us might miss, myself included. And if you have interviewers, the important thing to do is train them. Make sure that they're familiar with the recruitment and selection process at the company, how it's working, where they are. We want to make sure that the interviewers do not ask personal details that might reveal protected class information, such as, do you have kids? That's a pretty blatant one. We don't need to know whether or not they have kids to do the job. And we also want to make sure that they're trained not to make statements on eliminating at-will employment. I think I cover that on the next slide. We'll get into that.
All right, Andrew, before we move on, we've got a couple other questions that came in. I'm going to read those out loud and I'll give you some time to answer those questions. First question is, are there any good methods to setting up pay ranges when there is very limited pay data online? This particular individual works in the cannabis space and salary ranges can typically range all over the place. Is there a way to attract good candidates without overpromising in a developing market?
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially in the cannabis market, because it's so new and it's so evolving at this point that I don't know that any pay salary surveys are going to be valid for very long, just because things are changing with new states. I know Minnesota just enacted legal marijuana for recreational use. And you've got a whole bunch of potential federal regulations that might be changing under the Biden administration in terms of legalizing it. Who knows? I think that would take an act of Congress, but short answer is, if there's not, there might not be good salary ranges. It's not like you're hiring for a machinist in a specific zip code. If you have that, that's real easy data to get. If you're looking for something in an emerging market, I would call it, it's going to be harder to get that. And so you're going to have to come up with what you think is fair based upon the data you have and based upon your budget.
Okay. One other question that came in is, if we message a candidate using our applicant tracking system and they do not respond within a day or so, is that something we can point to as a legit reason for skipping that candidate? This is something
Absolutely.
that occurs quite a bit in quick service restaurants.
Absolutely. All you need is a legitimate, non-discriminatory business reason. And if you say that we reach out, and if they don't reach back within 2 days, we move on. That's fine. I'm cool with that.
Okay. All right. A couple more questions. How long do you have to keep resumes and applications on file? Do you only have to keep information on the people you actually interview, or do you have to keep them all?
Oh, that's coming up in about 4 or 5 slides.
All right, perfect. And then one last question. What if they volunteer information about children regarding their availability? I think you mentioned this slide.
Yeah, that's fine. If they volunteer information, that's fine. But just don't specifically seek it out.
Okay.
All right.
It.
Sweet. Thanks, Ty. We got like 23 minutes left. All right. We're lost, but we're making good time. We are going to talk about interviews real quick. When you reach out to them for an interview, make sure that you offer an accommodation if they need it. Just indicate, in an email that if they need an accommodation that they should request one and how they can do it. That's pretty quickly. We want the interviewers to thoroughly review any completed applications or resumes before the interview, and use the applications just to assess the skill and background of each employee and ask clarifying questions about being able to perform the essential functions of the job. In the interview, I think this is fairly obvious, but we want to ask appropriate questions. So we want to ask questions that focus on their skills, their work experience, their education, their training, and their accomplishments. We want to ask open-ended questions that reasonably relate to the job for which the applicants are applying. So if you're going to hire a forklift operator, you don't want them, you don't want to know about their thoughts about Descartes' theory of reason. That's just not going to help you. We want to know what kind of certifications they have or don't have regarding safety and driving forklifts and stuff like that. And be sure to ask them about the applicant's interest in the position. Why this job? What interested you in this job? And I've heard some really dumb answers to that question. I need the money. Sometimes that's fine. You'll hire them anyways. But just make sure that you're finding applicants that are going to be more interested in the position, as they're more likely to stay in the position. I'm going to answer these questions, Ty. I beat you to it.
I was just about to chime in, so go ahead.
Question is, are you required to interview candidates in the order in which they apply if they're viable? No, there's no law that says you is first come, first served. You can do whatever order you want. If you think that somebody is more qualified and they applied fifth, you can order the interview first if you want. And this is a good one. I have an example. I skipped it in my notes because I didn't think anybody really wanted it. So let me just go back a slide so I can get back to my notes. Interview accommodations. So we and the attorney, we were in the IDS, and the attorney had seeing eye dog. And so they wanted to bring their dog in because obviously that was their service animal. So what we had to do is we had to let building security know seeing eye dog to be coming up to our suite to interview. We had to find out where appropriate areas were for the dog to go to the bathroom and stuff, so we could let the applicant know ahead of time. And I think we also interviewed someone with hearing impairment, and they requested a sign language interpreter to help them out. And we granted that. So those are some examples of an accommodation for disabilities in interviews. Checking up on interviews or on references. You can ask whatever you want within reason, as long as it's not discriminatory. The question is, are you going to get an answer? And if they've talked to me, they're not going to get much of an answer. As an employer,
Andrew, we're having a little bit of audio technical difficulty.
Oh, how are you? Is this good?
That's good.
All right. Sorry, I wandered away from my microphone a little bit. We're talking about references. I tell employers only to verify name, dates of employment, and sometimes salary history. Even then, most employers aren't looking for that anymore. So that's what I do. So if you're asking for a former employer, you're not going to get much. You can ask, but they don't have to answer. Lori, we've got some pre-employment slides coming up next in terms of testing. Yes, there are requirements. I'll get into that in a hot sec. All right. All right, on to pre-employment testing. I'm going to do this one real brief as much as I can. So you can require applicants to take pre-employment tests, demonstrate various skills and traits, computer typing skills, cognitive and physical abilities, personality traits, emotional intelligence, language proficiency. If those are BFOQs, bona fide employment qualifications, then you can test for them. And so while these pre-employment tests can help you screen out and select applicants for a job, they also have liability risks if the tests are not valid, if the tests are not accurate, or if the tests are not accurately implemented or vetted. So just consider before you do any pre-employment testing, just make sure that the test is absolutely necessary to evaluate the candidates. If it's not, don't do the test. Don't open yourself up to the liability. Ensure that there are accurate validity studies that are available to support that the testing is non-discriminatory should it ever be questioned by the EEOC. You should apply all testing uniformly, and if there's a reasonable accommodation needed, again, such as if it's a test on a screen and somebody who is vision impaired is taking it, make sure there's a screen reader or some other accommodation so that they can perform the test. And then drug testing, which is its own day-long seminar if we really wanted to do it.
All right, Andrew, we have a couple more questions that came in. Is it discriminatory to reject someone who does not speak English if communicating with children and other staff is essential for the job?
Yeah, that's probably fine. I mean, communication is important. And if they can't communicate enough to perform the essential functions of the job, I think you can reject them. I would just not put that in your job description.
Okay. Great question that came in from Katrina. Can you make candidates take a DISC test? This is a personality test of, one of the tests that are out there. There's several others as well. So personality and behavioral assessments.
Yeah, I know a lot of companies put a lot of stock into that and they won't hire you unless you're a certain personality type. So yes, you can do that. Again, just make sure that there's validity studies to the test and that your third party, whoever's doing the testing for you, is going to back that up in case there's an issue.
Okay. Can you ask an employer, can you, as an employer, ask an applicant to come and show current employees, and do you have to pay them for that? So I think that's kind of demonstration of skills is what I'm assuming here.
Yeah, there's a lot of question in terms of whether or not training is compensable time or whether or not pre-employment testing is compensable time. And the question comes down to whether or not the company gets any benefit out of it. So if if an employer came in and said, Andrew, come in and draft me a will for this client, and I came in and I drafted the will and they used it, yeah, that's compensable time. So you probably want to avoid that. You want to avoid anything that provides a benefit to the company in terms of production of something. And we got a question about using Indeed, where people are 10 to 30 miles away applying for fast food position, making minimum wage, and they want to look past the employees that are basically too far out. And the question is that okay? And I'm okay with narrowing out applicants that are too far away. It's non-discriminatory. It's a legitimate business reason, especially here, like I live in Milwaukee. And so if you got somebody in Madison who wants to drive an hour into Milwaukee to do a minimum wage job, I'm going to have some questions about that, especially due to winter traffic and all that fun stuff. So yes, I'm cool with that.
We have another question. I had to withdraw from positions. Oh, I think this is more of a statement. Kind of going back to the compensatory scenarios that you mentioned before. So that would probably apply. Completing the I-9 with employees working remotely or away from the office, can an employee verify a copy or upload a document, or does it still have to be the original document?
Guidance just changed on that. EEOC, I think that ends at the end of the month. Not EEOC, not DHS. I can't think of USCIS. Basically changed the ruling. You can no longer remotely verify employment documents as of, I believe, 8/31. Don't quote me on the exact date. And those that were remotely verified have to be physically verified within a certain time period after that 8/31 deadline. So it's going to have to be going forward. I would just start doing the actual document itself in terms of verifying IDs, either the list A, B, or C document. All right.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to talk about selecting a successful applicant. First thing we're going to do is we're gonna try to avoid discrimination claims because nobody wants to be sued. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a decision based upon, objective evaluation. If we've used forms based upon questions that have weighted values, we're going to add those up and we're going to use those. We're going to record the reasons for the final decision in writing so that they can be defended later if necessary. The first step in all that is making a verbal offer. We want to call up the successful applicant and say that, we would like to make a conditional offer, and tell them that that you will follow up with a written offer. Discuss start dates, discuss compensation if it's negotiable, any other employment terms that you need, and then start the next stage of the hiring process by submitting a formal written letter. That formal offer should indicate any contingencies that are based upon the applicant's application. So do we need to verify that they're eligible to work in the US? Yes, for everybody. If they're E-Verify, if you're an E-Verify employer, indicate that they have to successfully pass E-Verify. If you're doing a background check, include that, or a drug test. Any contingencies that you have, such as making them sign a non-compete or a non-disclosure, make sure that's in the offer letter. We're going to conduct our due diligence. We're also going to make sure that they are not subject to a non-compete agreement that prevents them from working for us. Happens a lot with salespeople and sales professionals. Non-solicits and non-competes are big things there. And then background checks, again, its own seminar. If you're going to do it, make sure that you're following state and local law. That's a short way of saying, a lot of things, but make sure you follow state and local law, including the Fair Credit Reporting Act and other things that you need to do. Social media screening, I don't love it. Some people do it. It's not the end of the world, but if you're hiring for a position that could come with a lot of social flack, if you want to do it, make sure you follow all the laws on that too. And then finally, we're going to shoot out rejection notices to applicants that did not make it. And this answers the question that came out earlier, but before that, I guess I'm going to get to Sandra here. So Sandra, you're saying your company's in Texas, some speak Spanish only, however, all the safety items are in English. Do we need to have a translator on each shift? Probably you do not need to have a translator there. You need to do some OSHA training to make sure that everyone is trained on how to safely perform their job. You might want to think about translating any safety sensitive training documents into Spanish so that that is covered. But no, you were not going to be required to have a translator sitting there twiddling their thumbs waiting for someone to ask a question. Katrina, you say that if you've had people that have taken over a week to reply to an offer, and then you've said if you don't hear by 3 to 5 days, you'll withdraw the offer. Is that okay? Yes, basic contract law says an offer can be rescinded before it's accepted at any time. So if you make an offer, I'll buy your car for $1 million, and you don't say yes, I can withdraw my offer at any time before you say yes and accept my offer. Background check for 1099 employees. Should we do one? It depends on the position. I generally don't see it unless they're working with children or some other area where they might have individual access to vulnerable people. I probably wouldn't do it, but it's going to depend on the exact facts. Christian says, is there any way to do a work interview in person inside the business to see the applicant's skills? So can the applicant work a day inside the business to see his performance skills, see if he can handle it, and how fast he can catch things? So basically, you want to do a trial run, then you'd pay them. Yes, but I wouldn't call that an interview. I would call that hiring them and then firing them. You're an at-will employer. You can fire anyone at any time for any reason and for no reason, as long as it's not discriminatory, as long as you don't make any promise of employment for a specific period of time, and as long as you complete the required paperwork like the W-4 and the I-9. Absolutely. That's the way I would handle that. I wouldn't call it an interview. Jeremiah, I just answered this basically. Oh, I didn't. Can an offer be withdrawn after the candidate accepts? Probably not. At that point, you would have to fire them. At that point, you could not rescind an accepted offer. Angie, yes. Can you rescind it before you've even though you've given them a deadline to respond? Probably. It's going to come down to case law in your state in terms of what the contract cases have said, but generally an offer can be rescinded at any time. If they accept after you rescind, they might try to claim quantum merit or quasi contract or something like that. It wouldn't be worth it for them to litigate because there's not a lot of money in it for them, I don't think. We have a question about I-9 documents and re-verifying them. What are your responsibilities to re-verify them? You don't. Once you look at them and you seem that they appear to be normal, you don't have to look at them again. Once they're good until they expire, essentially. Ooh, Angela, I like this question. Who is considered an at-will employee? Every state except for Montana is an at-will employment state. Montana is not, for reasons we won't go into, but it's really fascinating. If you're an employment law nerd like me. An at-will employee can be fired at any time for any reason or for no reason, as long as the reason not discriminatory or otherwise prohibited by law, blah, 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 blah. So as long as you say you're an at-will employee, tell someone they're an at-will employee, as long as you don't make a promise of employment for a specified period of time or for an indefinite period of time, you do not you do not change that at-will employment nature. So the general rule, I think in every state except for Montana, is that everyone is an at-will employee unless otherwise stated. All right, Ty, we're coming up on 12:30. I can keep answering some of these questions, but I don't think we're gonna get much farther in
How many more slides do we have in the deck?
14.
Oh, okay.
But
I would say
this is the last slide on hiring, and then the AI starts after this, so we could just skip the whole AI section.
yeah, I given the amount of questions that are coming in and the collaboration, I think we might have to pause the AI and maybe do a follow-up webinar on that, because we are coming up to the top of the hour. So let's go ahead and wrap things up and answer these last questions that are coming in. You still will honor the HR certificates and the continuing education, but given the topic of choice and where we're coming in with questions, like to keep the collaboration going. We'll answer the last bit of questions and we'll wrap things up for the day if that works for you, Andrew.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I can read these out for you and then we can go from there. We have one from Leah. In our restaurants, we typically have potential team members, servers and cooks, join us for 3 to 4 realistic job previews. We pay them $50 for their time, but they do not get hired until afterwards if we move forward. Is this legal?
It's legal, but the question is, are you complying with the I-9 and W-4 requirements? So I would make sure that you do that before you have anybody do compensable work.
Okay. A lot of questions around I-9. Are we required to keep copies of the I-9 documents?
Oh, the actual IDs is my question. The answer is no, you're not required to. There's 2 schools of thought. I don't think either one is wrong. One says you should definitely keep copies of it because if there are ever questions, you can say this is what we saw and it looks legitimate. The other theory of thought, which is one I generally subscribe to, is that if you don't have copies of it, they can't prove to you that what you saw was fraudulent. And so they just have to take your word that it looked legitimate when you saw it. And you're not giving them the evidence of the documents themselves. So whatever you do, just do it consistently. Either keep them all or don't keep any.
Okay. We do not start the post-offer testing until they accept the offer. We do have the offer and contingent on successful completion of testing. Are we saying that we would have to fire them instead of rescind the offer?
So if they're doing something that would be compensable work and they don't quote unquote pass the probation period or the probation day, yes, then I would say it would be a termination instead of not hiring. But if it generally is a skills test, like I know I worked for Coca-Cola for a hot minute in college and I had to do a test where you had to like step upstairs with a heart rate monitor carrying 50 pounds or something like that. That is a physical abilities test, which would not be providing value to the employer and that would not be compensable. So that would be an offer that would be withdrawn.
Okay. Last question here, just to make a statement for everyone who's still on the call. We will have this on demand, so the recording will be available. You'll just have to revisit the link that's in the email and then fill out the form and then it'll start automatically on demand. We'll leave with this question. When leaving, is the notice period required for an at-will employee?
1 second. You can be fired at any time with or without notice, and the employee can quit at any time with or without notice as an at-will employee.
Great. So we are right at the top of the hour. Andrew, I appreciate you, asking all of these questions and providing, answers for everyone that joined us on the call today. Thank you again for presenting as well. Definitely want to come back to revisiting the AI job descriptions and AI processes while hiring new employees. I think that is a topic within itself, and it's very fresh. We apologize if we didn't get to it today, but we are out of time. Thank you for joining us today, and I will be in touch with everyone regarding the HRCI credits and SHRM credits at the conclusion of today's webinar. All right, we will go ahead and end today's session. Andrew, thank you again. Thank you very much to myHRcounsel for co-hosting the webinar with us today. We really appreciate partnering with you all and all that you've done. A very diligent presentation, and we look forward to working with you guys again in the future.
Thanks, Ty.
Appreciate it. Thanks. Everyone have a great day.